Hi everyone, welcome. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. I'm going to start with something, if you're not from Canada, you've probably been wondering about over the past few days, and that's the land acknowledgements that you may have been hearing. And the reason I'm going to start with that, let me just for those of you who this is new to, this is part of the journey that Canada's going on truth and reconciliation, where we are acknowledging the wrongs that have been done to the Indigenous communities in Canada, recognizing the discrimination, the genocide that they have faced and that they continue to face, acknowledging what has happened, what continues to happen, and doing work as a country to help to rectify that. And so that's the reason you hear these land acknowledgements at the beginning of these sessions, because it's about acknowledging the fact that as settlers, our ancestors came and took the land from Indigenous communities. And so the land that we're gathered on today, as you will have probably heard this week, is Tiohtià:ke, which is Montreal. And it is the land, it's the unceded land, the stolen lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka. And it is lands where many First Nations, because this isn't a monolith of people who lived here, came and gathered and spoke and met and on these lands. So the Kanien'kehá:ka of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, the Abenaki, and the Anishinaabe. And so acknowledging the land that we're standing on is important, but also acknowledging what the experience has been and recognizing our own roles and as the person giving this land acknowledgement, recognizing my role and the work that I will do as a Canadian on this land is an important part of this acknowledgement at the beginning of this meeting. And so I'd want to acknowledge that the oppressive and inequitable socioeconomic and political systems in Canada continue to perpetuate a legacy of racism, of intergenerational trauma, of structural inequality, and that legacy is directly linked to the disproportionate impacts of HIV on Indigenous communities in Canada. And as the executive director of the Stephen Lewis Foundation, which is a non-Indigenous organization based in the global north, I also want to acknowledge my own privilege and the privilege of the organization and the role in the systems of colonization that affect First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities in Canada, but also affect other communities around the world that have been most affected by HIV and AIDS, and that we have a role and that the work of the foundation is to help to dismantle some of those systems as well. So thank you for being here today. Merci d'être venu ce soir. J'espère que vous êtes tous heureux d'être ici pour reconnaître, pour l'occasion de reprendre contact les uns avec les autres. I think after 2 years of not having the opportunity to meet, I am really excited to be here after sitting in rooms listening to people talk, actually having the opportunity to see old friends and to meet new people and to build some of the relationships that are really important for the work that we're doing collectively as well. I want to welcome you on behalf of the Stephen Lewis Foundation. And for those who don't know the foundation, we work in long-term partnerships with community-led organizations in sub-Saharan Africa. We support them with finances and with other resources in partnership that we've had 20 years of experience doing. And so, I've heard throughout the conference a lot of talk about working with community-led organizations and some of the difficulties with it. And I've got to say, it's not impossible. We've been doing it for a long time, and it's important work that has to be done. We have partners here today, and I hope you get a chance to meet some of our partners who are in the room and to learn from them and learn from their expertise on the front lines of the fight against HIV. We also, through our experience, advocate within the global philanthropic community and within the global health community for organizations to look at how they can dismantle some of the colonial practices within the work that they do and ensure that they center community-led organizations. So tonight, I get the pleasure of actually introducing to you Vuyiseka Dubula-Majola, who is going to speak to you about some of the work that we have done at the foundation with our partners and with other members of FCAA, looking at how we can decolonialize our funding practices. And so Vuyiseka is the director of the Stellenbosch University's Africa Center for HIV and AIDS. She also served as the national representative for people living with HIV on the South African National AIDS Council. She has served on 2 national ministerial advisory committees on leadership, governance, and service delivery. She's the founder of the Activist Center for Education and Development, which strives to facilitate access to higher education for social justice activists. And, because she's not busy enough in her spare time, she earned her PhD from the University of KwaZulu-Natal School of Development Studies. She's the former Secretary General of the Treatment Action Campaign in South Africa and the former Director of Programs at the Sonke Gender Justice. She has also been a member of the UNAIDS High-Level Commission for HIV Prevention, and in my mind, most importantly and proudly, a board member for the Stephen Lewis Foundation.
Thank you, Meg. Sometimes I wonder, who is that person? You know, when someone is reading your bio, did I write that? Okay. The business of today is for us to tap into our spaces of discomfort, especially for those of you who are in the community of giving, and those of us who are in the community of receiving, but sometimes give. Resources that are not always in monetary terms. So I'm asking us to go deep in that space of uncomfortability, that space of vulnerability, because we can't have a conversation about reflecting on how are we going to decolonize the way in which we are supporting community work, because this conversation requires us to examine systems and power and systems of oppression that were there during colonization, that still exist and are maintained in the ways in which we are engaging with communities. And those lasting effects, you find them in those log frames, you find them in those templates, you find them in those proposals, in those concept notes. Sometimes in there ingrained is the way in which we assert and insert our way of thinking, that our way is the only way. And those continue to persist because privilege, often that is in the spaces of those who are funding, is not questioned. And we don't question our own privilege. The Stephen Lewis Foundation forces itself to question its own privilege. And it's inviting all of us to question our own privilege. In what way are we funding that is not colonial? And if you want to prove that you are not colonial, then there are ways in which we can do that by beginning to think about funding community organizations as a way of building solidarity, as a way that you are contributing to global social public good. You are not doing charity. We are not beggars. We are not poor. We might not have the dollar, but we have intellectual property. We have indigenous knowledge. And most of all, we have put our bodies on the line to support our peers. People living with HIV, women living with HIV, transgender women living with HIV, MSMs living with HIV, sex workers living with HIV are there 24/7, even on the days when the money does not come. We show up for our peers. That's why we are inviting all those who are in the community of giving to think about this in solidarity terms, not in charity. So, if we are thinking about it as in terms of solidarity, it allows us to tap into possibilities of co-creation. You are not the person who knows everything. You come with some knowledge, but you're coming to a community that knows also something. So don't assume that the way you think about something is going to be given, that the community is just going to accept it without challenging it. Unfortunately, often we don't have ways in which we can challenge it because we don't have the money and we need the money. And then we then end up accepting the money and someone thinks that we accept the way you think. We don't. I'm going to tell you the truth. We don't. But because we don't have the resources, we take it. We therefore then also ourselves perpetuate colonialization. So we have a lot of healing also as a community because we have been subjected to this for too long and have accepted that that is the only way to do things. It is not only the donors that must change, also Nati, we must change. But we must know that this trauma of living in colonial ways and funding communities in colonial ways also perpetuates structural racism. Why is it, starting in Canada, why is it that we give so much dollars to support communities in Africa, but we don't give the same support to people who are dying in your own country? Is it because people in Canada are seen as they are well off and therefore there's no one who's poor in Canada? In fact, poor people in America have no access to the same drug I have access to in Africa. Why is it have we accepted that? That, for me, is at the core of what is perpetuating racism because the system of colonization has never left us. It has a different face, a different shape, and a different color, but it is here in this room. It is that very system that is asking organizations to change their anatomy. I'll give you an example. When I was a general secretary of TAC for 8 years, there was one donor I will not mention for diplomacy's sake, because we are not here, we have not succeeded in the struggle. They will require so much changes in the organization that you yourself don't recognize the same organization that you are for 5 years. They find you for 5 years. They ask you to change this and this. When they leave, you cannot even recognize yourself. You have to start building again. They have destroyed the very true DNA of our movements. But we did not push back because we didn't have the money. Now we are putting it back to all of you who care, funders who care. Really reflect, come to the communities, ask us how we want to be funded, co-create the tools with us, co-create the way in which we must develop these log frames with you. Of course, you can tell by now I do not like log frame. And by co-creation, we will innovate. Communities are innovators. And this trust deficit between donors and community-led organizations must fall now. There is so much trust deficit that communities don't know what to do. They must be told by the donor what to do and how to do it. Have we ever stopped and thought for a minute? What did these communities do before you arrived? Before you landed there and parachuted yourself? What were we doing? We were doing the same thing you are funding us. You are there as a partner. You are not there to tell. Partner with us. We are open to partnerships that are equal and balances this uneven power. Just because we don't have money doesn't mean we don't have resources. So it starts with us acknowledging the problem. Has any donor or community that comes from those who give asked themselves, have we ever reflected about the ways in which we may be colonized in the way we are thinking about this in a colonized way? So that then allows you to go to a space of vulnerability within. And I always say, if someone denies that they're HIV positive before they go for an HIV test, you must know that is a culprit. That person is HIV positive. If you are saying you are not colonial, you are colonial, because you must prove otherwise. So for as long as we have not reflected, we cannot claim that we are not, because we have no evidence that you actually are a reflecting organization that actually you check yourself. So, of course, the project of decolonization brings tension. Allow that tension to surface. Work with that tension. It's not a negative tension. It is the tension that is asking us to really deep down and question ourselves. Are we doing good? And what is this good in the behavior, in the way of doing? And how have we engaged with communities? In what way is that equalizing the game. And here is an offering. It is the start of a conversation. The communities have engaged the foundation and said, here are at least 5 principles that we are asking us you to engage, and therefore we can then ask other donors. The principles are there in the documents, but those principles are allowing you to think about dollar investment in social good terms, dollar investment in inclusive terms, in co-creation terms, in ways in which we can abolish this imbalance in power in how we are engaging with communities. It is also asking us to fund courageously. There is no life that is clean. So when you are imposing a template of reporting that is clean, you are asking a community to think about itself as if life is clean. Life is messy. Accept that mess, and you will find that mess in every organization. I am that mess. We are that mess. Work with us within that mess. And your template will never be finalized for life, because life is a mess. So I'm hoping by the end of this month, the templates will fall. We must be measured differently. Measure the work we do differently. There are ways in which we can account, and we know that we must account for the money, because you have raised the money from public money, and therefore we must, from the public, from taxpayers. We know we must account. We are accountable even in our own countries. The people who raise the money that we have been using, we are accounting, but we are accounting differently. Don't impose your ways of accountability to us, which we don't know who came up with them. Come to the community and ask, in what ways can we measure? In what ways can we report about this? And we will tell you. We know. We don't tell you because we think you think your solutions are better than ours. But we do have solutions. Make it easy then to fund community-based organizations to apply. When you are using an internet-based systems in a community where there's no consistent access to energy and electricity, how are people going to apply? Why are you advertising this grant for who? For international organizations who have access to these things. So don't pretend like you are funding communities when you have made it so hard for community-based organizations to access even the application form, even to complete the application. That is decolonizing. Change the way in which you are asking people to apply, to make it easy for communities to access that money. And lastly, I think there is so much we can do together if we think differently about how we work. Communities that give are bridges. You are not capacity builders. We have so much capacity, you have no idea. You are a bridge between those who have resources and those who do not have. And that bridge must be walkable. It mustn't be a mountain. That bridge must be crossable. It can't be a huge Nile River. You know, we can't reach the other community on the other side. I'm asking you, in what ways are you going to begin to think about this? Gates Foundation. In what ways is PEPFAR going to think about this? In what ways is Elma, a philanthropist, going to think about this? Sorry, I'm naming a few that are just coming. Ford Foundation. And we have to call on you that we know, who were here in this meeting, and ask you, in the next 3 months, what are you going to do? It begins with a conversation. We're not asking you to ask, Bill and Melinda to suddenly drop all their templates. Let's begin with a conversation that's self-introspect. In what ways are we going to do this differently? And therefore, we can then put systems in place and how we're going to reverse all these ills of the past. We cannot maintain it. The status quo cannot hold. We are done. We are tired. And soon, one community is going to tell you, take your man, go home. Thank you.